Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nazir Daf Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Jane and David Shapiro in honor of their Skokie Daf Yomi compatriots, Shira, Norman Eliezer, Nina Black, and Rav Marian Novak. You keep us engaged, enthusiastic, and inspired by the daf every day. So it's good I started over. I have another important announcement, which is, keep forgetting to say it, the skills class is beginning this coming Sunday. So starting it's easy to know, remember the 4 Sundays in February, going to be a skills class. I will be teaching it. The topic is accidental murderer, which is a fascinating topic, especially in terms of thought. How do we deal with an accidental murderer? What do we do? Are they reviewing this? Are they punished? Do they need protection? Do they need, for their own sake, a need for atonement? It's a fascinating topic. We're going to learn 4 sugyot within the 2nd chapter of Makot. And with it, we're going to use it as a way to build skills, how to learn what things to pay attention to, how to punctuate. It's all chavruta-based learning. We'll spread out into Zoom breakout rooms. People can learn on their own with their own chavrutot, however they want, over the phone, through the Zoom. You can pick your own room if you want. You can be randomly given a chavruta. You can learn it on your own time. It's a digital course, so it all sits online. There's nicely designed study guides that help take you through. It's a very guided chavruta. It's not like throwing you in and go figure it out. Everything is translated into English. So if you don't have good Hebrew skills and certainly not Aramaic skills, help you with all that. So highly recommended course. The whole goal here is, number one, we're learning every day Daf Yomi, but it's also nice to understand how to learn it on our own, how to, again, you're not going to come out of the course, oh, now I can learn Gemara on my own. It's years of practice, but it will give you building blocks and things that as you learn daily, you'll start noticing them more, and it will help you develop your skills. So you have to register. It's a free course. You have to register on the site to have access to all the materials, and it's all, you should be able to find it on the website. There's a courses tab, and then you can find it within there and on the menu. So please join. Okay, next. We had Bar Pada and Rav Matna been arguing over 29 days or 30 days, and how many days is Stam Nazirut, right? Obviously, if you specify how many days you want, then there's no question. Here we're all talking about when you didn't specify, how long is the period of Nazirut. The last thing we saw was that the suggestion that maybe their debate was connected with a machloket Tanaim of Rabbi Yonatan and Rabbi Yoshia, but then the Gemara rejected it. And within the explanation, we had this line that then the Gemara went back to try to understand. So Amar Mar, 3 lines from the bottom of Bava Batra. I'm going to review the very last section that we did. Right, they got to the 30 days from the fact that it said Ad Milot Yamim. Nazir brings the sacrifice right here. All the days he's a Nazir, right? He can't cut his hair until Milot Hayamim. Now, what are days that need limalot to fill in? That must be 30 days, right? The months. Because 30 days of a month fills in every other month, 29 or 30, when we're missing a day, because last month it was only 29. It's really 29 and a half. So in the lunar calendar, there's 29 and a half days in a month, but we can't count a half day. So we have to fill it in every month. To which the Gemara suggested Shabbat. They said, no, it can't be Shabbat. It can't be a week because weeks aren't missing anything. So Ema Shana, what about a year? Starting now from the top of Zayin, Amud Aleph, what about a year? Because years do need filling in every once in a while because we follow the lunar calendar, and there's less days in the lunar calendar than the solar calendar. In order to make sure the Pesach comes out in the spring, we have to add an entire month. So a year is also something that needs filling in. So why don't we say Milot Yamim until the days are filled in, could be referring to a year, and then Stam Nazirut would be a year according to this. Nina Yomi V'ha Rabbanan Kesri Amre Minayin She'ein Monim Yamim L'Shanim. We don't do days to fill in a year. What do we use? We don't say, oh, we're missing a few days, so let's add, right, because it's 11 days a year, let's add 11 days every year. No, what do? Every few years, right? There's 7 leap years within a 19-year cycle. So in those 7 years, we add an entire month. How do we know this? That we don't do it this way? Quoting from this past week's Parsha Bo, Shenemar L'chodshei Hashana, right? Chodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim. This will be the first month for you. Rishonu lachem L'chodshei Hashana will be the first month for you for the months of the year. Why does it say the months of the year? To teach you that when you need to fill in years, you fill them in with months and not with days. So therefore, what is right? So chodashim mechashrim l'shanim v'lo yamin l'shanim. You don't add extra days, you add extra months, right? This is obviously different than a leap year on the Gregorian calendar, which is basically adding another day once every 4 years. But now they say the following, which is ad milot hayamim would have to be when days are used to fill in, and that's only for the month and not for a year. So there we've basically proven how they got to that line in the Braita. Now, as I said, we're going to go to cases. The next 3 Mishnayot we're going to see. These next 3 Mishnayot are going to talk about different languages of acceptance of Nazirut. It's very similar. Again, more parallels between here and the beginning of the second Nidarim, which was we spent a long time when somebody says this, what did they mean? Blah, 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 right? And we said we had to keep trying to think about what was the intent of that person and therefore how many, in this case, it's going to be how many periods of Nazirut, how long. We're going to see all different options. So today we're going to learn 3 Mishnayot, and we're actually going to finish with all 3. We ended at the end of our daf at the end of a section. And we're going to see 3 different types of acceptances of Nazirut. So the first Mishnah starts like this. Amar hareini nazir achat gedola. I am a Nazir. Achat sounds like one period, which is a big period. Okay, I'm going to be Nazir for a long period of time. Hareini nazir achat ktana. I'm going to be a Nazir, one time period for a short period of time. Afilu mikam va'ad sof ha'olam. Even if you say, and I'm already going to kind of say something that's good, the Gemara is only going to point out. When I learned this first, I didn't even notice it, but the Gemara points it out, and now I noticed it, which is, here they're saying, even if you said the words from now ad sof ha'olam. So now what did you say? I would have said, hareini nazir mikam va'ad sof ha'olam. But what the Gemara is going to say later is, notice the first 2 cases, they all say, hareini nazir achat. I'm Nazir for one time period, a big one, or a small one, or from here till the end of the world. Okay, so, which sounds like, although we're going to raise all these questions, at the end, one of the answers is going to be no. That's not what they mean, because it says achat. Okay, so assuming this case of mikam va'ad sof ha'olam wasn't just hareini mikam va'ad sof ha'olam, or I'm going to be a Nazir from here till the end of the world, but you said I'm going to be a Nazir one period from now till the end of the world. Okay, or till the end of till the edge of the earth. So how long is you going to be for all these cases? You would think it would vary. Small would be small, long would be long, to the end of the world might be forever. But no, what does the Mishnah say? Nazir 30 yom. You're only a Nazir for 30 days. That's an interesting halacha, to which the Gemara is going to obviously ask, I don't get it. You said, particularly the last one, it sounds like you said forever. How could you possibly say it's 30 days? Before we move on, I want to look at the rush. The rush is on the bottom of the previous page. Sometimes it's just a printing issue. So here, if you look, just before it says pachot milamid yom, less than 30 days. Remember, the rush is on the outside in very small print. Since it's possible, because we don't really know what this person meant, but it's possible, and we'll have to see in the Gemara why they think it's possible. It's possible that's all they meant. Therefore, we say stam nazirut lahakel. This is something the Rosh quoted before, and it's going to be seen in the Gemara in a few dapim, which is quoted in the name of Rabbi Yehuda. When it comes to a case of Nazir, we're lenient. So, well, it might be when you said a long time period, or you said from here to the end, or maybe you meant forever, maybe you meant a year, maybe you meant, we don't know. But you might have only meant 30 days, which we don't yet understand why, but the first line in the Gemara is going to explain it. Therefore, since there's 2 options, and we're lenient when it comes to Nazir, so we'll be lenient here, and we'll say only 30 days. To which the Gemara says, Amai, but why? Right? The obvious question. I don't understand. You said from here till the end of the world. This question is going to have 2 answers, although after I taught it the first time today, I realized that the second answer, it's not so clear that it's coming to answer this question. It's the very last line before the next Mishnah at the bottom of Amud Aleph. So when we get there, we'll discuss maybe a little bit, but many of the commentaries view that as the second answer. So we'll go with saying there's 2 answers to that question, although I will suggest that it's possible that the second answer is actually coming to answer something different, okay, that comes up tok kedei, okay, because obviously we're going to get off on a tangent if the second answer is only at the bottom of this page. So the Gemara, let's just deal first with the first answer. We'll get to the second answer when we get there. Hachi ka'amar. This is what the way they understand it. The person was saying the following. How many times do we exaggerate in our lives, right? Oh, this is so hard. This is the hardest thing I've ever done, right? Or this is the longest day in the world, okay? What the person's saying is, I'm going to accept upon nazirut. That 30 days, wow, it feels to me like it's going to be the end of the, right? It's going to be from here till the end of the world. By the time I get to the end of this time period, it's going to feel really long, okay? They're basically saying, I'm taking upon a huge challenge. Okay, even though it's only 30 days, but to not drink wine, to not cut your hair, to not become pure to dead people, to not eat grapes, all those things. Wow, that's a real challenge. So again, going back to the rush, since it could possibly be interpreted this way as, wow, this is going to feel like it took forever, but really we're going to just say you're a Nazir for 30 days. So that's the Gemara's answer. However, we're going to start questioning this. And we're going to say, wait a minute, it's none. But there's another Mishnah on Daf Tet that says, get to here tomorrow, Hareini Nazir mikan ad makom ploni. I will be a Nazir from here until a certain place. So the language is the same, right? From here until X, right? From here until the end of the world, from here until a certain place. Okay, so like, right, I'm in Jerusalem, and I say from Jerusalem until Turkey, I don't know, something like that. So we assess how many days does it take you to get to that place? And then we have two tracks. Either it's pachot mishloshim yom, it takes less than 30 days, in which case you're Nazir shloshim yom, because you couldn't possibly be less than 30 days, that we already said, that's not nazirut. Ve'im lav, if it's more than 30 days, Nazir keminyan hayamim. We assume you meant exactly the amount of days it takes. So if it took 45 days, you're going to be a Nazir for 45 days, if that's the length of the journey from one place to the other. It's interesting to think, right? In those days, I imagine it wasn't so easy to tell how long your journey is going to take, right? Nowadays, you pretty much know how long it's going to take. You stick it in Google and whatever Google says, right? Whether it takes you that time or not, but you know exactly the distance from one place to another. It's the easiest thing in the world to find. In those days, you have to imagine that it was not so clear cut, but in any case, that's what they say. Now, the Rush explains this very well, okay? And he says, right, so actually, let's wait one more minute after we get to the next line, to which the Gemara asks, wait a minute. So we're now saying we have a problem, right? Why? This one says mikan va'ad makom ploni goes by the amount of days. And our Mishnah, mikan va'ad saf ha'olam, doesn't go by the amount of days, it's 30 days. So ema hachanami arichali milta k'mikan va'ad makom ploni. Maybe you're just saying, I'm taking upon nazirut, and it's going to be so difficult to me, it's going to feel like the amount of time that it takes to get from Jerusalem to Turkey. But it's not really what I meant. Let's count the days it's going to take me. So how do we resolve this? So Amar Rava is going to do what we always call a new kimta, which is there's something missing that you didn't know, a piece of information. That Mishnah about the Mikan v'Amakom Ploni is shehichzik baderech. I was already on my way, or I'm about to go on my way. I'm about to leave from Jerusalem to Turkey. And as I'm about to leave on my journey, I say the following declaration. I'm going to be a Nazir. Now, the Rush says very obviously, which is, Shechzik baderech. Now we're on our page on the Rush. In my thing, it's 4 lines down. Umistama kedei hishamer misakanat haderech kibel alav nazirut keminyan yimei haderech. Because we assume, why are you being a Nazir for the whole, right, for the amount of days it takes? Because you're on your way. And what you're saying is, I want God to protect me on the way. People do all sorts of things like this, right? They take on vows in order to get protection, right? Yaakov's the first prime example. And basically, you're saying, I want to be a Nazir while I'm on the way so that God will protect. So then it's much more obvious that that's what you meant. That's not the same as saying from here till the end of the world. Nobody in those days was traveling to the end of the world. And that's not what they meant. So now we could have ended here. And basically we have, in other words, we had an answer, we had a question on the answer, right? Our answer was, remember, why mikan va'ad saf ha'olam? Because you're saying it's so difficult to me, as if it was going to, right? It's going to feel like it took me from here till the end of the world. But why is that different from the other Mishnah, right? We're bringing the other Mishnah as a contradiction. It's different because that's a case shechzik baderech. However, Gemara is now going to say, I want to understand this case of you're on your way. Why did they rule when you're on your way and you say from here to that place, why did we assume that you're counting the days it takes? Right? That's what it said. Kiminyan hayami. V'lehave kol parsa or parsa. Maybe you meant, I'll say it in our language, right? By mile. How many miles it is? Okay. In their language, right? They called it, and they do have a meal in their language, but parsaot is an amount of parasang. Why don't you say, man, how many parasangs it takes? This question is actually twofold. It's saying, number one, why didn't you do it by parasangs and not by days? And number two, why didn't you do kol parsa or parsa, which means what? Maybe you didn't mean I'm going to be a Nazir for 45 days. Maybe you meant I'm going to be a Nazir for 200 miles or something. But what you meant was each mile, for each mile of the way, you're going to take upon yourself a 30-day time period. Okay? Maybe it means from here to there means for every mile that I go, again, in the Gemara's language, parasangs, I'm just using what you can relate to more, for every mile or kilometer that you travel, you're going to take upon yourself a 30-day time period of Nazirut. So if it's 200 miles, you'll be a Nazir 200 times of 30 days. So Amar Papa, why is it not that? It's a place where they don't count parasangs. In other words, right, when they measured how long it takes, they never measured it in parasangs, they measured it in days, okay? And that's why, again, it's a place, different places, the custom was different. Some people talked about travel in miles and parasangs, and some people talked about them in length of, how many days it will take. To which the Gemara says, well, still that explained to us why we go by days and not by parasangs. But what didn't it relate to? Why don't we say that each day is a whole? What I meant was for every day, right? It sounds a little like the spies, right? For every day they were there, they got punished. It's a whole, right? A whole year in the desert. So why don't we say v'lahavi kol avna v'avna? Which really, okay, there's a debate what exactly this means. Rashi in a different Masechet says that avna means tachana, stops. Maybe it means every stop. Where would they stop? They would stop at night and they would sleep. So maybe what it means is for every night you're going to stop, which basically means the amount of days of your trip, you will take upon yourself, again, the second question we asked before, a 30-day period. So for each day, 30 days of Nazirut. And why did they suggest this? Because this appears elsewhere. There's a model for this. Milotnan, doesn't it say in the Mishnah? Hareini nazir ka'afar ha'aretz, u'kisa'ar roshi, u'kechol hayam, harei nazir olam, u'megaleach echad l'shloshim yom. If you say, I'm going to be a Nazir like the dust of the earth, like the hairs on my head, like the sand in the sea, harei nazir olam, you will be a Nazir forever, but megalech echad l'shloshim yom, which in other words means you're going to shave every 30 days. So what does it basically mean? It means that you're taking upon yourself distinct units of 30 days of Nazirut forever, because these are things that can't be counted. We know that from the Torah, right? The Jews will be like the sand of the earth. So, right, or the dust of the earth, or the sand in the water. Anyway, the idea here is that you're taking upon yourself, in this case, unique units of Nazirut forever, but that's, so why don't we apply that to us and say you're taking upon yourself 30-day units of Naziruyot, one for, this time it won't be infinite, it'll be one for every day of your trip. So that would be smart to compare. To which the Gemara says, there's a difference. Se'ar roshi and afar ha'aretz and chol hayam, those are things that they can't be counted. Versus the days of my trip, which can be counted. If it can be counted, then we're going to assume we mean one long period in the amount of days that we said. If it can't be counted, then we're going to count it as separate, distinct units. And how do we know that we make this distinction? Because we're going to prove it from a Braita. Hatanya, hareini nazir kol yemei chayai, hareini nazir olam. If I say the words, I'm going to be a Nazir all the days of my life, or I say the words, I'm going to be a Nazir forever, which has no distinct amount of days. We have no idea how long we're going to live. Harei ze Nazir olam. You're a Nazir forever. But what's a Nazir olam? We already learned what a Nazir olam is. It means that you can shave periodically, right? You can, or cut your hair anyway. So you can trim your hair. In this case, it'll be once every 12 months. Okay, there's a minor distinction here between the two cases, but it's minor because in the end, what we view here is Nazirut at intervals of time. So you're basically taking upon yourself to be a Nazir in different units. It's a little bit different, but it's more similar to, let's say, saying you're a Nazir for a long period of time straight without being able to cut your hair in the middle. Right? Only Nazir Olam is allowed to cut their hair. But if I take on Nazirut for 10 years, I can't cut my hair in the middle because it's one long period. So what they're saying is, if it's infinite, the time you're talking about, or unable to be calculated, then you're a Nazir for incremental time periods. Again, there's a distinction. One is every 12 months you can cut your hair. That's the Nazir Olam. And the other one is, there's also a few other differences. I'm not going to, one is you just trim your hair. In this case, we're assuming you're taking upon yourself 30-day increments of Nazirut, and you keep stopping every 30 days. It seems to me like it's a little bit different, but I want to get into the details. I want to talk about the basics, that it's viewed as distinct Naziriyot rather than one long one. But let's keep going in this braita. If you say, though, afilu mea shana, afilu elef shanim, but if you say, I'm going to be a Nazir for 100 years, I'm going to be a Nazir for 1,000 years. Okay, now, in those days, right nowadays, thank God, there are people who live for 100 years. But in those days, very few people live for 100 years to that age. So basically, if you say for 100 years, which basically means forever for you, or you say, right, also, let's say you're at 50 years old when you say it, right? Or 1,000 years, which of course, no one's going to live 1,000 years. That's basically like saying forever, but it's not. Why? Because you gave it a time frame. It doesn't matter that the time frame is not realistic. That's called itle kitsuta. And that's what are we trying to prove from this braita? There's a difference if you gave it a time frame or you didn't give it a time frame. If it's got an unlimited time frame or unable to be counted time frame, it's going to be forever. And it's going to be, though, incremental units forever, right? We're going to view it as in increments because you basically gave it no end, and therefore we're going to cut it into, we're going to assume what you meant was distinct units. But if you give it an end time, even though that time may never come in your lifetime, Ein ze nazir olam, ela nazir le'olam. All of a sudden, we hear something that we didn't hear before. You could become a Nazir forever. What is forever? Forever means you can never cut your hair. It's kind of like Nazir Shimshon. It's different because you also can't be impure to dead people, which Shimshon was. But basically, this is a different category called the Nazir forever, where you can't cut your hair. Because what you're basically saying is, I want it to go for this amount of time. 100 years, 1,000 years, okay? Very similar to, I want to be a Nazir from here until I get to the next place, right? Into the place I'm going. That's viewed as one distinct Nazir shite, right? Nazir time period. So basically, that's the distinction, and that's what we use as proof that braita. So now, I want to just stop for a minute. A term, thank you. That was the word I was looking for. I want to stop for a minute because we've gotten kind of sidetracked, and I want to use the study guide to show you exactly what we're up to. Okay, so skipping the first part, but starting from our Mishnah. So we had Areni Nazir Chakdola, Areni Nazir Chaktana, Filu Mikam Vad Sof Olam, from here forever, right? You're a Nazir for 30 days. To which the Gemara asked this question: why didn't we say from here until the end of the world? To which the Gemara brought the first answer. We're only up to the first answer so far, which is, you said, it feels to me it's going to be forever, okay? But you really meant 30-day period. To which the Gemara said, how could you say that Mikam Vad Sof Olam means, I feel like it's going to be forever? Why didn't we say the same thing when we said, I'm going to be a Nazir from here till the following place? To which we answered, right? You see the chart here. Here's the distinction. The first Mishnah says, Shloshim Yom, and the second one says we're going to count how many days, again, assuming it's more than 30, we're going to count how many days and go by the amount of days. Why is there that distinction? And the answer is, Rava says, you're already on your way. Because you're on your way, we're going to view it like that. To which the Gemara now wanted to deal with that alone. We kind of left our question, and now we're dealing with this Mishnah that's in tomorrow's daf, which is, I'm already on my way. Why don't we count it? Why do we count it by days, not by parsaot? To which we answered, it must be a place where they don't count parsaot. Then we said, why don't we count as unique individual units? And you wanted 30 days per day, right? A 30-day nazirut for every day of your trip. To which we said, just like Afar Haaretz Ha'arosh Kol Hayam, where it's going to be once every 30 days, you're going to have to, basically, you're taking upon yourself individual units of 30-day units forever of being a Nazir. To which the Gemara answered, number one answer here, because we're going to have two answers, and this is why I wanted to go back so you see what we're up to. Why is the basic answer, the question right here is, why is the case from here till this location, which is going to be counted by however many days you're traveling, but viewed as one period of Nazirut, not the same as I'm going to be a Nazir like the dust of the earth, etc. And that's because one has kitsuta, one doesn't have kitsuta. If you give a specific end amount, like a finite thing that can be counted, then it's considered one unit. If it's something that can't be counted, then we view it as separate units. That's answer number one. It's not a perfect answer because just because I said an amount that can't be counted, who's to say that means I wanted separate units, right? It's not a perfect answer. And that's probably why we have a second answer to this question. So now they say, Rabba Amal, Shane Sa'arot To'il Umuvdalot Zomisa. What's the difference between going on a trip, and it'll take me 45 days to get there, to I'm taking upon Nazirut based on the hairs on my head, or the sand in the water, or the dust in the earth. All those things, even though they can't be counted, they're separate from each other. The sand particles, the dust particles, the hairs, they're all separate. So therefore, when you say like the hairs on my head, it's the easiest one to visualize because you can separate them much more easily. The hairs on my head, what you meant is each one is individual and separate. It's not what we call in Hebrew a retzef. It's not a continuum. So therefore, we're assuming that you meant separate individual naziruyot. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean days aren't separate individual units? Yomi nami haktiv, and here we're going to prove from the Torah they're not separate individual units. We all know these psukim from the creation of the world. It was night, it was morning, and it was the first day. First day was distinguished from the second day, distinguished from the third day, etc. Every day is its own distinct unit. So what do you mean? Same thing as the hairs on my head. To which the Gemara says, no, that's not true. That pasuk is not coming to teach you the days are each individual units. My kamar, what are they telling you? What they want to tell you is, and some of the commentaries say, like for the purposes of Shabbat and Yom Tov, right? Shabbat comes in at night. Yom Tov comes in at night, and it starts, the days go by the night and then continue through the day. That's what it's coming to teach you by Erev Vayiboker Yom Echad. But La'olam lo mifseke me'adade, but days are a continuum. Of course they are. One goes into the next, right? You can't even exactly figure out what exact moment does this day end and that day start. Whereas, of course, you can figure out which hair is which hair. They're separate from each other. So basically, that's the second answer to the question, why are the hairs different from this Mishnah that we brought up from tomorrow's daf about if you're taking a trip and you say from now until a certain time. Now we get back, and like I said, this is the complicated part, which is this really answering the original question? Okay, now we're done. That was the old tangent we got off on because we compared, once we had our answer, mikan va'ad means I'm going to view this as a very difficult thing. Why in the next Mishnah does mikan va'ad till the time I get to where my destination, why does that not mean the same thing? And then we distinguish why it doesn't mean the same thing. Within that, we also had another question that perhaps this is answering, which is why didn't we view them as separate increments, right? In the case in the next Mishnah, and yet we viewed it as one continuum. So maybe it's answering that question, but in any case, let's assume right now the way many of the commentaries explain, although you'll see what the weakness is, that this is answering the first question, which is why mikan va'ad sof ha'olam, which sounds like you're taking upon a huge time of Nazirut, you're actually really only taking on a 30-day period. The problem is that this answer is really telling you why it's not increments of, and that's why it's a little bit tricky. Anyway, we'll read it, and I'll leave it kind of as a bit of an open question. Rava Amar, why are you asking all these questions? In other words, I'm going to neutralize the question. Okay, so again, which question he's referring to is the debate. Is it the original question, or is it the question distinguishing between I'm going on a trip and it's these days, and that's one time period, versus the hairs on my head, which is many time periods, right? Many niziruyot, many separate periods of nizir. And this is why they really go back to our Mishnah, even though it really is answering the second question. And you'll see why in a minute. So our Mishnah said, and this is what, when I read the Mishnah, I wanted to read it with this thinking. It says, I'm going to be Nazir Achat for a long time period. I'm going to be one time period of Nazir, but a long one or a short one, or from here until the end of the world. Now, it didn't say from here until the end of the world, it didn't say the word achat, but it seemed to be referring to if instead of gdola or instead of tana, you filled in the words from here to the end of the world, which means that this time period is one time period because you said achat. And that's why clearly mikan va'ad tafa is going to be, now here the tricky part. That seems to be relating, here's why it's really confusing, and I'll kind of leave you with a little confusion, but I want you to see the problem in the text. This seems to be saying, why is it one period and not multiple periods? But no one actually thought the Mishnah was multiple periods. What the question on the Mishnah was, why is it 30 days and not forever, right? So maybe the thought was that forever means forever in increments. It's possible. But it's really answering why 30 days. And this doesn't really answer 30 days. What this really answers is, why is it not in separate nazirut time periods for a long period of time? It's really saying, why is it one time period? Okay, but so either it's somehow saying it's one time period, and one time period is always 30, traditionally, or could be 30 days, or maybe it's really relating more to the question before about the difference between se'ar on the head and the mikan va'ad, whatever. The problem is there. That doesn't relate to our Mishnah. That was comparing the Mishnah on Daf Chet to the other Mishnah, and they're using the language in our Mishnah. So there's something that's a little tricky about this last line that's not so clear cut. Okay. New Mishnah. Hareini Nazir v'yom echad. I'm going to be a Nazir and one day. Now, Hareini Nazir in and of itself means I'm going to be a Nazir and stam Nazirut shloshim yom. So therefore, you're going to see in a minute, we're going to say what you really did was you took upon yourself two time periods. One, a regular 30-day, and one for one day. Now, there's no such thing as one day. One day is 30 days. So therefore, you take on two time periods of 30 days each. Hareini Nazir v'sha'a achat. I'm going to be a Nazir and 1 hour. Hareini Nazir achat b'mekza. I'm going to be a Nazir and I'm going to take on another half of Nazirut. Hareini Nazir shtayim. In all these cases, right, another half would mean 45 days, right? 30 and then another 15. But there's no such thing as 15. Minimum is 30. So all these cases, you're going to be a Nazir for 60 days, two separate time periods of Nazirut, two separate terms. To which the Gemara asks the obvious question, why do you need to ask, Kolhani, why do you need to list all these cases? Could have just listed 1, 2, right? Why do you need all 3? Normally, the structure you'll see is if we only had 1, we wouldn't know 2. If we only had 2, we wouldn't know 3. And then you have to go back and say, if we only had 3, you wouldn't know 2. If we only had that, and you'd have to kind of go all of them if you didn't have 2. Our Gemara is not going to do that. It's going to be much simpler and not do it the way that really it needs to be done, which is they're just going to say, if you didn't have 1, you wouldn't have known 2. If you only had 1, you wouldn't have known 2. If you only had 2, or you have 1 and 2, you wouldn't have known 3. Okay, and then it's not going to go backwards in the other direction. Sricha, why do we need them all? If you just have the first one, I'm the Nazir for 30 days, and then you say, and for 1 day, right again. Hareini Nazir already in itself means 30 days. So you said, I'm going to be a Nazir, that's 30 days. Yom Echad, that's also. You would say maybe only in that case, because there's no such thing as a Nazir for 1 day. But Amtulahachi kamane tartin, and that's why you need to do 2. Aval hareini Nazir b'sha'a achat. But Hareini Nazir b'sha'a achat. Now, you have to add some words here because it doesn't really explain what the issue is. Nazirut, the same way we said that you don't count years in days and you don't count, right? You count months in days to months, but you don't count days to years. So likewise here, you don't count Nazirut in hours. So therefore, if you said at an hour, since you don't really count Nazirut by hours, therefore, maybe you were just adding on an additional hour to your original term. And you're basically saying, I want it to last 1 more hour, which basically is in the end going to mean you need it to last 1 more day because no such thing as an hour. And that's what you meant. But you can't take on a Nazir time period for hours because nobody speaks in hours when it comes to Nazir. And therefore, you might have thought that, Kamashma, the Mishnah says, no. Even if you say an hour, that means since you already said I'm a Nazir, and that was already 30 days, when you said an hour, you're adding on. And since you're adding on, it doesn't matter that it was just an hour, you're now going to have to be a Nazir for a whole time period of 30 days. Now moving to Amud Bet. Now we have to explain the next, which is Itana sha'achat. If you said 1 hour, mishum de lo nachit ledafka, and as if you had case 1 and then you had case 2 of the hour, you would have said, well, lo nachit ledafka. Okay, this doesn't really mean anything. There's no such thing as taking on Nazirut for an hour. And that's why it's going to be considered. But that's why what? That's why you can't, there's no such thing as adding on an extra hour to the previous one. That doesn't mean anything. Adding on a day, maybe you could extend it, but adding on an hour doesn't mean anything. So that's why it's not added on to the previous, but it stands by itself because you can't be adding it. But if you say a chapa mechza, the nachet ledavka, a chapa mechza really means you're saying, I'm taking hareini nazir a chapa mechza. We hadn't learned this Mishnah, and I told you, I'm taking kippah nazir at 1.5. What would you have told me? 45 days, right? Because it seems pretty clear that's what you're saying. Ema lo limnei tartis, so you might have thought you don't count 2. Hamash malan kulam nazir shtayim. Okay, that's why you need the third case to teach you. Even that is going to be viewed as 2 separate naziriyot. Because again, the way they view it is you said hareini nazir, that's already a whole time period. Then you said a chapa mechza, then you're adding an extra half. Well, there's no such thing as adding 15 days, so you have to add another 30. This is going to be distinguished from the next Mishnah, which is, we're up to that already. Hareini nazir shloshim yom v'sha'a achat. I'm going to be a nazir for 30 days and 1 hour. Now, what's different here? The main important difference is you didn't say hareini nazir and then add something additional. You said I'm a nazir for 30 days. So here you're already giving a time for how long your nazir term is going to last, which you didn't do in the first one. There you just said hareini nazir and an extra hour. So then we're going to view it hareini nazir is 30 days. Extra hour stands by itself. But if you give the days, you say shloshim yom v'sha'a achat, then we view 30 and an hour as one unit. And what you're basically saying is I want to be a nazir for 31 days. Again, you're saying it strangely because you're saying an hour, but there's no such thing as an hour. So you're adding 1 extra hour to your term, which is going to have to add an extra day. So therefore, nazir shloshim ve'echad yom she'ein nazirut l'sha'ot, because there's no such thing as nazir for sha'ot. Now, the obvious assumption of this, and we're going to assume this as we go on for the next line, which is also if you said shloshim ve'echad yom, right? 30 and 1 day, you mean 31 days, obviously. So comes Rav and says the following thing. From here, we're going to get into a totally different topic, which is a very interesting topic that we're going to learn when we get to Bava Batra. They're going to quote a Mishnah from Bava Batra. Amar lo shanu ela de amar shloshim ve'echad yom. It's only if the language you used, and here I told you, we're going to segue right into days. It doesn't matter, hours, days, it's all the same. If you say 30 and 1 day, you obviously mean I'm going to be a nazir for 31 days. You didn't mean I'm going to be a nazir for 30 days. And then also another term of 1 day, which really is going to end up having to be 30. Ava, but if you say, Amal shloshim yom v'yom echad, there's a problem with the girsa here, but you see the yom is in brackets, square brackets, that means you're supposed to add it. If you say 30 days and 1 day, then nazir shnayim. Why? So Rav savar like Rabbi Akiva de darish lishana yetera. Rav holds like Rabbi Akiva, who darshans extra words. Remember, Rabbi Akiva is the one who darshans every kotz in the Torah, every crown, and he darshans every word, every et in the Torah. And not only does he do it by that, he does it by words that we use. It was an approach to life in general. People don't use words unnecessarily. So if I say the words, I'm going to be a nazir for 30 days and 1 day, obviously that day is unnecessary. I just could have said 31 days. Doesn't make sense. I said 30 days and 1 day. So if I say 30 days and 1 day, what I obviously added that word day to mean is I want 2 separate units of 30 days. I want 30 days, and then I want another term for 1 day, which is going to have to turn into 30. Okay? So now, where do we get this from Rabbi Akiva? And here we're going to learn, and that's going to be the end of today's stuff, this Mishnah in Bava Batra, very interesting Mishnah. It's not. This is a bit of a promo into what we're going to get into in Nezikin, which is very interesting. Lo etabol velo etadut. You weren't supposed to understand anything yet, no worries. I sell you my house, and my house comes with my backyard. In my backyard, I have a bore or a dut, which is a pit or a cistern. Okay, there are different kinds. One is more, has stones in it. It doesn't really matter the differences right now. When I sell you my house and I write a contract for my house, it does not, surprisingly, right? You would have thought it would. It does not include the bore or the dut, okay? The pit or the cistern. Doesn't include, it's not part of the sale. That's something, if I sell you my property, again, you have to really be living in those times to understand how things work. I didn't sell you that, okay? So now, even if I wrote you, okay, so that's lo tabul v'lo tadut. That's not part of the sale. Even if I wrote in the contract, I'm giving you my house and the property for the depths of it and for the heights of it, okay? That's still not included. You would think the depths would include the pit that I've dug. No, what it means is you have building rights. You can dig, you can build, okay? I'm telling you that you have the rights to do what you want with this property, but you don't get my bore or cistern. Now, however, Rabbi Akiva holds, and Tosfot explains that what? So first of all, Tosfot says lo et bor because it's not part of house. House includes house, doesn't include bor. But then he says, I have to buy my path to get there because what happened? I sold you all the property. So I also sold you the rights to all the property around. I can't just walk through your property. Remember, we had this whole thing about walking through someone's property in the Hadran. I can't just walk through your property. So now I have no access route to get to my bore or my cistern. So why is this? So Rabbi Akiva holds, this by the way has nothing yet to do with the Rabbi Akiva we're looking for, hold off. Rabbi Akiva holds, I'm reading in Tosfot now, when I sell generously. So bore is not included, the pit or the cistern, but when I sold you the land, I sold it generously, meaning I gave you all the rights to everything. And I didn't save myself a path. So what do I have to do? I have to purchase from you, or alternatively, put it into the contract that, I'm selling you for this price, but I'm going to lower the price a little bit because I need to buy this path. I need to buy an access route to get to my pit or cistern. Again, this is all, like we've been talking about all along, what do we assume human behavior is? When I sell my house, do we assume that most people sell ba'ayin yafeh? Rabbi Akiva has a very positive attitude about people. The rabbis are, no, people are stingy about it. I'm going to sell only what I have to sell. And if I'm keeping the bore, first of all, it's not just stingy, but it's also obvious what I'm going to keep my bore, but not give myself an access route. Of course, I didn't intend to sell you my access route to the pit that's in your field, your backyard. Of course, I kept that for myself. Here comes the important line for our purposes. Rabbi Akiva does agree with the rabbis. If I said I'm selling you my house, and in the contract I said, or I wrote, or I said it orally, and I said I'm selling you my house other than the bore and the dut, okay, the pit and the cistern. Now I don't need to say those words. Here comes the unnecessary words. I don't need to say that because anytime I sell my house, it's not going to include them. So why did I add those words if not to say I'm not selling you the bore and the cistern, and I'm not selling you a route to them either? So she'enot tzarich likach lo derech. In that case, Rabbi Akiva agrees that since I added unnecessary words, what I obviously meant was something more. What I obviously meant is I'm not just keeping the pit and the cistern, I'm also keeping an access route to the pit and the cistern. And therefore, now go back to where we were. Rav says, in our case, that our Mishnah is only if you said shloshim b'yom echad. But if you said 30 days and 1 day, you wouldn't have added the day if you didn't need to add it that first day. He must be adding it to say I'm taking upon 2 separate time periods. So it's not what the Mishnah says, but he says that it's what the Mishnah means. That's his understanding. And as the Gemara said, he must hold like Rabbi Akiva, who darshans, and basically, right, even human words can be darshan, basically. And we use exactly the word he used to figure out why did you add unnecessary words? It must have been to tell us something. So we saw it with the bore and the dut, and then we're applying it to our case as well. That's it for today. We'll finish here. And as I said in the beginning of class, what we saw here were 3 different Mishnayot with different languages. Based on the language, we determined how long a term of nazirut it is. And again, just to remind you where we started with the rush, it's not necessarily that we are sure you meant this, but again, because stam nazirut lahakel, that is at least one of the we have fundamental principles that we use. Here we have Rav using Rabbi Akiva's fundamental principles. We try to take principles we know from other places and apply them here to figure out how we rule, even if we don't necessarily 100% know exactly what you know. That's it for today. Wishing everyone a good day, and don't forget to register for the skills course. Hoping to see you all there. Have a great day, everyone.